Excellent. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the development seminar on trials. So, hopefully, everyone's excited for the upcoming Throppy trials. I hope this is helpful for those of you trialing for Throppy this Thursday, but also in the future when you're looking at trialing for other tournaments through DeepSoc. It's very useful to learn from the wealth of experience. We have a special guest today, Shah. Shah is obviously very good at debating, so I'll allow him to introduce himself and all of his experience.
Hi everyone. So I'm an ex-debater from university now. I graduated last year. I studied a conjoint of law, computer science, and maths. Melissa has asked me to just give a rundown of my best debating memory and worst debating memory, hoping that'll encompass, you know, just debating that I've done. I think my best debating memory is probably going to Australasian International Tournament in Bali in 2019. That's really fun. And obviously, COVID sucks, and online debating has been the norm for a bit just because we had to. But hopefully, with the return to in persons, everyone can get the experience of an international tournament. So that's something to look forward to in your debating career. I guess my worst debating memory probably is relevant to this, which is where I kind of fucked up trials in 2019. I just bombed it, didn't perform well, tried to be too smart sometimes in debates, uh, and it got placed in a team that I was like not expecting to be in. But we'll get to that later on. But that's a bit of a debating memory. And I think Melissa told me as well to wrap this up. Like even though there are some bad parts of debating when you underperform and you don't feel like you've done the best you could, why you come back. And I think the reason that you should think of is you love debating, right? It's like the reason I do debating, at least, hopefully it's the same for you guys. It's just a fun game to play. It's just a little bit better in a competitive environment, regardless of what team you're in, because people are taking it a little bit seriously. It's the same reason you play any competitive activity, right? And similar veins, the reasons I want to be good at tournaments is because best motions are in the out rounds, and you can just do more debating in that environment. And that's what you should be striving for, not necessarily the win or the top team, but that element of fun that comes with the competition.
Definitely. And also the fun friends that you make along the way. I think, getting smart alongside them also makes it a really fun aspect of debating. But thank you, Shah. Thank you for introducing yourself. Lovely to hear all of your fun experiences. But today we're here to talk about trials. So just starting off with a general question, what's the point of trials? Why do we have them? Can you please give us a little bit more light as to why we do it?
Yeah, so in a general sense, at least my idea of what trials are supposed to be, is that it's supposed to be determining your debating ability. And yes, it's like your debating ability on the day of trials, like how you perform in trials. So it kind of sucks a little bit that you're boiled down to that performance on the day. But I think it's good because it recognizes that people can improve, that people can also plateau, and dynamics around who's good at debating changes all the time. And I think trials recognizes that fact and tries to achieve the balance of rewarding people of putting in the work and getting better, and not ensuring that there's like stagnation at the top. So trials is a good motivating force in that way as well.
Awesome. So trials are for picking teams based on everyone's vibes on the day. But what actually happens at trials? Can you give me a rundown of what it looks like? It's quite different to normal tournaments. So what actually happens?
Yeah. So in the similar vein of the point of trials, in terms of picking teams, what selectors are trying to do is trying to achieve the most amount of information out of every single debate they see, right? Because they're trying to compare people and their debating abilities and put them into teams that work well as well, not just as being good, but just working well together. So what happens is usually selectors will make a draw of the teams that are going to see in different rooms. So they'll put the people trialing in different rooms with set speaker positions, and there'll be a set motion for the round. Obviously, in terms of setting speaker positions, the selectors will try and maximize everyone's preferences, and you're able to provide your speaking preferences before selections happen. And then they create the rooms that they think they can get the most information from. After that, you go to a debate, the selectors will judge, and after that, there might be a couple more rounds, right? I think the minimum of three applies for most tournaments. And so after that, again, once they've got some information, they use that information to create rooms so they can get more information from. And so that might mean in interests of having more selectors on rooms, some people may sit out, but that just means that they've got information on you, not necessarily any decision has been made about the people that sit out. Yeah, so the minimum of three, but obviously if there is more information to have a level of certainty to make close calls, there could be some callback debates, so that there could be a little bit more debates of fewer speakers as it goes down.
Thanks. So you mentioned that there are people called selectors. So who are they, and why does the club let them decide who we put in each teams?
Yeah, good question. Selectors are usually like veteran debaters. They're usually people who have either won, broken, or edged code the respective tournament that they're selecting for. So they're I guess have relative deep knowledge as to what would be skills that would make you competitive in that tournament, that would make you good in that tournament, and skills that you should be rewarded for having. Um, they usually are selected by the exec, and try to achieve a wide balance in opinion. So occasionally, the executive I've known brings in international judges or judges from other parts of New Zealand, so that you get a wide perspective, and it's not just Auckland speakers selecting you, but just individuals who have the debating experience and will be able to give good, reckons on people's abilities.
Nice. So what are these selectors actually looking for on the day? How can you show off those technical skills that you have?
Right. Yeah, it's not really a science. It's very hard, debating being such a subjective activity, and so the selectors trying to be as objective as possible about your debating ability and your deservedness of being in a particular team. I think we'll get into like how you can approach trials and uh, perform individually a little bit later on. I think there's a section somewhere soon. But the try pick are based on, for now, I'll just say your debating ability and the way that you showcase your debating skills, whether it be your style, your structure, the content you have, and your ability down the line in responsiveness is particularly important if you are trialing to be a second or third position. Um, but yeah, that's basically what they're trying to achieve. But the secondary level to that is kind of getting an idea of how the team works. So as I said before, the speaker role, so what role you're probably better suited to comparison to the other people also trialing for that particular team. And also how you perform together at trials. So yes, trials might seem relatively individualistic because you are competing against people who will be in your team, but the way that you push information down the line, the way that you're a team player often is some of the most subjective things that judges also kind of look for to ensure that they can make more cohesive teams that really work together.
Okay, we'll move into some more questions now about how we can prepare for trials. So there's quite a few questions here. I'll just go through them one by one. So first, what can I do before trials to help myself prepare for trials on the day?
Um, so a little bit more long term, like a week before, you could do a lot of practice debates just to shake the rust off or to get a little bit more feedback from individuals who might be selecting or just people who are good at debating and friends of yours. And these are organized usually by the people who are traveling, right? And there are many ways to get yourself involved. There's a practice Facebook group. I think it's Auckland Practice Group Training Group or
Auckland
something.
Debating Practice
There we
2022.
go. Yeah, and you should definitely join that because there are updates. People will message saying, "Hey, we're doing a practice debate. We need two speakers to fill in, or we need a judge, and the judges will be on there offering to judge." And that's one way to join. You can just message the exec if you feel like you need practice, and they'll hopefully organize something for you. There's a lot of people willing to practice because everyone has the same goals of doing well at trials, so it should be fine. But then there's also just personal practice, like to the extent that you can't do a full debate, just give your speech yourself to get the rust off of, read the news, the usual things that are able to, hone your instincts and debating ability. And I think honestly, the final thing and a very important thing that I didn't learn until very late in my debating career, the best thing you can do is just have a good night's rest before trials. sleep like 9 hours, get your brain rested for a relatively long day the next day.
I agree. As someone who's been tired during trials, never been my best performance.
Yeah, it's also just a bit of torture.
Definitely. So now that you've done a little bit of preparation for trials, what should you do to approach trials? How should you approach it? Should I hoard all of my knowledge or should I be a good teammate? How do I strike that balance?
That's a good question, and I think there's no maybe people have different opinions. My personal opinion on hoarding knowledge is that even in a competitive debate, again, the judges are kind of expecting this to be a reflection of how you do at a tournament. And even in a competitive debate, you don't actually gain, there's a level of how much you gain from hoarding material. And if you think of debating more as a continuous line between speeches of a case that is made out at first, and then defended, rebuilt, and engaging with the other team's case at second, and then meta wrapping it up at third, it's often much better for you as a second speaker to push some material up to first, because often you don't want to spend all the time rebuilding a context or characterization that wasn't made properly at first and then do your responses. You want to showcase your responses, not whether you can make a context or not. So it's often useful then to help your first speaker create that, have a good case, and then you can then showcase your particular skills in that speaker position. So often hoarding material, I think, actually undermine that. But again, some people have different approaches. It's just nice to have a proper debate. Win that debate, you often all perform better as a team when you all lift each other up collectively. Yeah.
I know that you also have a lot of friends in debating with controversial opinions on how to approach trials. Do you know if any of them have opposing views on how they should approach trials or how they have approached trials when you've been around them?
Well, yeah, I think I know some people that have explicitly told me, and they no longer debate anymore. This is ages ago, ancient history. Who sometimes say, "Oh, I just thought of this point, but I left it for second. I made a split point." And I don't know. I haven't noticed any. So that's their approach. Sometimes they keep some things to themselves and make and say later on in their speech. And I haven't really noticed any advantage that they achieve or disadvantage others. So that's why that's not usually my approach. Some other approaches I think are minimal interaction. So this is tough because you definitely need to create a first speech because that's just a case and that's literally all you have there. But some people are relatively quiet on the bench, and I think in the era of like online trials, I guess it's much harder to have the communication. So some of the additional things that come out might just purely be yours as they are only thought about in your speech as well. So those are just I guess, the spectrum of approaches you can take. It's up to you to decide which one is more you and which one you think is actually going to achieve the results you want.
I agree. I think approaches to trials comes from trialing a few times and then you kind of figure it out. I know for me, definitely, my first trials was joint 2020. It was very early in the year, didn't really know anyone, and Jenna Rabin was selecting, and I was shitting myself. It was terrifying. They put me in the top room with Umber and Bella, and I was like, I don't know what to say. These people are clearly smarter than me. But I learned from that it gets better. And, obviously, if you're trialing for therapy on Thursday, you'll have a very different experience. And some of you have already got over that first hurdle, already had trialed before.
Yeah.
But yeah, you kind of get it as you keep going. So I guess it's a trial and error approach. Just do what you feel like. Don't intentionally hold yourself back if that's not you. But if you, do think that you'll do better if you come up with all of the smart responses later, give it a go. Maybe it sticks, maybe it doesn't. So yeah, I think the
yeah,
conclusion. Sorry, you go, Shah.
Yeah, no, conclude this. I was going to say we should also talk about what to do maybe in those situations where
Definitely.
you're in a tough room and stuff, but maybe we'll get to that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think just as a conclusion, there's no right or wrong answer. Lots of very smart older people who have like gone on to break at Worlds, break at Australs, have done the hoarding method where they've held back information. other people who have been equally successful and made the top teams haven't done this and just been themselves. So it really is just up to you, and depends how well you can execute them either way, obviously.
As my 2 cents, I highly advocate the non-holding method. I think everyone's speeches are better when you approach it like a debate. You're trying to win, and so you do everything like you would normally do in a competitive debate, because that's the best way for judges and sorry selectors, I guess, because they're not really judging you, to kind of get the vibe of how you work in a team. And personally, that has been the most successful approach for me. But again, as I said, try
I
things out.
agree. Yeah,
Find your
I
way.
agree personally. I think obviously there's a difference between necessarily like carrying a first speaker that has no ideas and giving them some ideas. I would still give them some ideas. I might just not,
Yeah.
dictate their case to them because it's still trials, but I would in a normal team. So yeah, just that would be
Yeah,
my
sorry.
point
Yeah,
I would make.
that's good. Yeah, there's a difference, uh, and it's up to you to find the balance between that. Yeah.
Does it during trials, say you've had one round, you've not had your best performance? I can relate to that. Doesn't mean you're going to make a bad team if you don't see those main selectors on every round. So how can you recover then if you think you've had a bad round and you've not got the main selectors on your room anymore? How can you really shine and get back up to top teams
Yeah,
where you want to be?
that's good. Yeah, yeah. I'll start that answer off by saying, so in the selection process, selectors won't give you feedback until the end of trials. So after each debate, it's a little bit more about self-reflection. So what do you think went wrong? Do you think there's anything that you can improve on? Anything that is, if there are things that are unavoidable, I encourage you to put that out of your mind. Stay calm. What is done is done. That's just what happened. You will have losses in tournaments as well. Debates you will lose, and it's the same kind of thing. Go on to the next debate thinking about only that debate and what you can do in that debate. And similarly, I think even if you know that you had a bad round now, and you feel like you're not in the room that you used to be in, and that you might have been demoted a little bit in terms of like how the selectors see you. It's not like the end of the world. I have many times seen people, maybe mess up the first round and then perform excellently at the usual level in the second round, and then the selectors are like, okay, that obviously was a round thing. We should see them again. And that's the whole process of getting information. And so as soon as you change the calibration of selectors, there's definitely a path up there. And so selectors will look at you again. But I guess the pathway to do that, I guess, psychologically, is to just approach it as one debate at a time, and try to, as much as possible. I know this is hard sometimes when people worry about it, but to take your mind away from the whole process, that there actually is an end goal of a team selection. Think of it as, this is the debate, this is the motion, this is my position, I need to win the debate, and just all of your thought into that, so that every other thought doesn't necessarily distract you from doing well in that round.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think you can get two in your head after a bad round because obviously selectors are still, quite aware that people do have freak bad rounds or they're shaking the rust off. Sometimes, trials are the first time that you've been debating in a long time or you haven't had the same kind of warm up. So you do need that one round to shake off the rust and then move forward. And then I guess I would look at it as selectors would still value your best performance like very highly. They won't just be like, oh, well, they performed well later, but they had a shocking first round. So I'm not going to make them get on a good team, I do think that they are, normal people. So they're still going to understand as they have had their own debating careers. Sometimes there is just a bad round and you're still a good debater regardless. So Shah, do
Yeah,
you
and I
have
think that's
any
it.
insight into that as someone who has selected before?
Yeah, I was going to say, so I think especially in selection, um, we're also a little bit forward looking. So what we're looking for isn't necessarily, did you win that debate, right? Otherwise, you could just have a like actual trial. So the winner of tournaments, the winner of debates gets into certain teams. What we're looking for is whether you show the basic, I guess, knowledge of how a debate works, and are able to do the basics of structuring that response, doing a little bit of the strategy, weighing, all that stuff that's required for each different speaker position. So even if it's a debate that you know nothing about, it's about, I don't know, Mongolian warlords like no idea, and your speech is bad because you just didn't know about it. But if you attempt to, ask the right questions, even if your answers are bad to those questions, that showcases to the judge that you know what would be going on if you just had that content. And the content is unavoidable, and usually those kinds of motions aren't set at trials for that very reason. But I guess the point that I would say is that as long as you do the basics and you show to the judge in the next debate, let's say you had a bad first round, in the second round, you don't have to be amazing to change the selectors' minds. You just need to be like, oh, they do actually know what's going on in a debate, and that one might have been just to do other factors like just Rust or content. So there's ways to calibrate the selectors.
Yeah. Stepping forward from that, what kind of does it mean? I know I always did this earlier on in my debating career, is like I'd read the rooms and go, oh no, I'm with like, I'm not in the top room. Does that mean I'm going to make a bad team? How much can you read into that kind of stuff? What can you really tell from trials, and how can you keep your confidence up even if you do,
Right. So you actually can't. Like, I'm also guilty of this kind of like back tabbing the trials and seeing what that means for each person. But being in the selection room afterwards, like as now I'm a selector, will kind of made me realize that again, it's all about the information gathering. So sometimes you'd see someone and then be like, okay, we know a lot of that information. We've compared two people at first, for example, and now we think someone else deserves to be compared as first there, which means they would be in that room, in the top room where everything's happening for that comparison. And obviously the other person either will have to sit out if they need to make other rooms, or will be put into a room that's lower on the, I guess, selection list in that sense. And so it doesn't really mean as much. Like there have been tournaments recently, the couple of last few ones, where I did one round and then I was, I guess a lower room and up with everyone else I was debating with in the past. And I was like, okay, maybe I did something bad. But it turns out that they did like me, and they were like, we don't need to see as much information anymore, so they put me in lower rooms. So you can't really tell, and just getting into that trap of thinking about it without actually ever being able to know is again just not worth it, and it's not going to help you out with the trials. So try and detach yourself from the long-term picture.
Absolutely. You just can't backtab trials because, yeah, they are just
You
information.
can't backtab
So
tournaments
they
either.
could just be, demoting you because they need an extra speaker that speaks in that position.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like it
Or
might
they're
not
testing
be,
other people's responsive abilities to your
or
speech. Yeah.
they know that your responses are good, so they want to see other people's responses to your responses. So I guess I make this mistake, and then I get all up in my head. I'm like, oh no, they hate me. I'm never going to do well. And then I won't do as well as I can in every opportunity because I think I'm bad, but I'm not.
I mean, as empirical evidence for this fact, in the last few selections, I think a lot of our mutual friends have been backdabbing, and oh, what does this mean? Could this mean this? And then after the tournament, after the selections, talking to the selectors, find out that something completely different is happening. Completely two different people have been compared that they thought that they were. So like, just from anecdotal evidence, it's impossible, and you're often wrong. So. Yeah.
Absolutely. I hard agree on that because yeah, you never know. They are, having thoughts about everyone. So you can't just be like, oh, this means this for me, because there are also, five other people in the room that they're also looking at information for.
Exactly.
You just don't know if it's about you or if it's about someone else. So you can't get caught up in that. Just do your best debate every time. Cool.
Yeah.
So that's, don't psych yourself out. But another question, how do I prove myself in a competitive debate? So how do I really capitalize on, if I do make that top room, how do I really show my best debating abilities?
Right. Yeah. There again, I guess the answer is still very similar. It's just to do those basics and hold your own. As long as you can show that you're holding your own in that room, you probably deserve to be there. Just do the basic debating stuff correctly. Often, okay, there are two traps. One is a little bit of a mental trap, where you get into a room where, especially if you're in a responsive position, a lot of material has happened already. and you're kind of drowned in a bunch of mechanisms and points that come out at the speaker you're supposed to respond to. Um, and sometimes it's overwhelming. So sometimes you need to take a step back and be like, so a couple of considerations here. You need to structure your speech while responding to points. And often thinking of all those responses sometimes harms your structure versus also focusing on structure means you aren't responding to as many things. So it's just important to keep that in mind and realize that your speech overall, in an individual sense, might be better sometimes if you prioritize certain responses and then focus on structure so you don't let the speech kind of run away from you. That's a very specific example about the responsive speaker. But I think the principle behind it is the same. It's just that don't get the level of, I guess, argumentation and level of debating around you make you try and like jump to that level at the consequence of harming your own speech. And so as long as you can show the judge that you have the capacity to be able to deal with these things in a structured manner, then you're showing the judge that you have that ability, right? As opposed to, so it's selective, I should say, as opposed to trying to do everything and not being able to do anything well. But again, that is my approach, which there might be several different opinions of how to deal with that competitive room that you might be in.
I definitely agree. Like when I contrast my worst trials, which was probably like 2020 joint, and then my best trials, which was probably 2021 joint, the thing that changed was in 2020 joint, I just got too much in my head about what each room meant. You know, all of these people are better than me. And I didn't just stick to my guns. I tried to like change my debating style in one random debate, which just doesn't work because, you know, you haven't practiced that. You're not used to that. You're not going to put your best stuff out there. But in 2021, all I did was, you know, stick to my guns. All of the practice that I'd done in the last year of, you know, getting better at things, being exposed to new styles with online debating was really helpful. Just did what I, you know, did my thing, and it had a great outcome for me. So I would just recommend, don't try and change your style. Don't try and change anything drastic during trials. Just try and be the best version of, you know, the things that you already know.
And that's the, I guess, the safest way to ensure that you consistently got the elements of debating down and showing that your selectors that.
Yeah, because all I did was do the basics really well, and I made the best team that I've made so far. So it was very, very fun. So now that you've trialed, you've gotten over the nerves, you've just gotten your best performance out there. How can you train to make yourself competitive for a tournament? So you've been picked onto a team. How do you, with that team, train to make yourself competitive for a tournament?
Yeah, well, that's actually really important. And I think a good thing about debating is that or debating in uni with trials, is that you kind of have your own team. Whereas in high school, you might have debated with very similar people for like your entire year group as you went through school. This changes a lot. So in my first couple of tournaments, I had completely different teammates. I mean, all good friends of mine. But the important thing is actually to learn how to work together. So the first thing you should do is get feedback from your selectors, hopefully on the day, or message them if they aren't around, because you know, selectors forget about stuff. And you know, obviously get personal feedback on how you can improve, but also because the selectors have spent time thinking about whether the team works together, they also will know about maybe certain deficiencies in between the team. So maybe one speaker is very good at responses, but then needs to work on pushing those responses up, and the selectors will be able to give you that kind of advice. And then obviously, the important thing is to practice together. So you should actually do a lot of practice together more than personal individual practice, because you need to get prep working nicely, because there's a lot of personal dynamics in prep. You need to delegate responsibility, learn how people work, learn how people think, and then within the debate as well, how to talk to each other on the bench. Some people don't like being directly talked to, some people do, some people like you to write things down and send it to you. So all this needs a little bit of calibration. So it's important to start prepping together, start working together, and debating with these new people and getting a hold of how they work. And again, where to get this kind of practice is, you can always ask, veteran older debaters like me. I'm happy to come debate / judge debates. The exec will organize practices, and then there's the club nights are very good places to get the practice, because it's already that structure there. There's already a judge. There's already a motion. The exec can organize all that, so you should definitely take that opportunity to debate in teams.
Yeah, definitely love to the point about being such a big shift when you're usually with the same people and you know them very well, so you don't really have to focus on that prep dynamic when you really do when you come to uni debating and you're usually in a new team every tournament. I think that's really fun because you get new friends every tournament. But I think that the biggest part of practice that you want to focus on is you working together at prep because you can all be very strong individual speakers but absolutely implode because you don't have the right communication style or
Yeah,
practice of interacting with each other's communication style. So
very true, very true.
definitely, yeah,
I
after
mean,
you've
it's
been
also, I think
selected,
it's,
go ahead, Shah.
yeah, it's also just it's just a, I guess a life lesson, right? Like debating in the end is a team sport in the way that you have to rely on other people. So it's actually pretty hard sometimes to trust the speaker coming after you to do certain things and not try and do everything yourself. To trust and prep that people are doing their own things, they have the ability to do that. Obviously, you train together and work on all those skills, right? So work on if you're a second speaker, help your first speaker create a case, create the structure of it. But after a while, you should be a little bit hands off and let the first speaker create the structure a little bit more and try and let go of that control instinct you have because that's not your job, that's their job. You should trust that they're able to do it, that you have helped them. Even if they are relatively bad at it, in your opinion, your approach should be to work on it together so that they're able to do that. And again, in your opinion, maybe they always were able to do that, but you need to let go of the idea that you need to do everything in prep and trust the people around you. It's hard. It's a really hard thing to do. You should work on that together.
I agree. It's very hard to let go as a third speaker, but got to learn to do it. Trust your
Yeah.
teammates, and remember the selectors have put you together for a reason. So it's not just like you've randomly been shoved into a team. They've thought about it quite a lot. They spent the whole day thinking about it, probably time beforehand thinking about which vibes are going to work together. So there is a reason that you guys are on a team. So I think that would be the main thing to keep in mind when you're moving forward with practicing and making yourself competitive. Okay, so that's how to train for a tournament as a team. But at the end of trials, when teams have been decided, what does a team number actually mean? Because everyone's being put in a team from like A1 to A whatever, how many maximum people we can send to that tournament. What does the number actually mean?
Okay. Well, this is interesting. I guess the number, I guess, firstly, I guess indicates, oh, it's like a reward for your performance at trials, right? Like you did well, you've shown yourself to be one of these top speakers, and therefore you deserve to be in that top team together. But even in terms of like a top team, as I said before, the other things that come into consideration are how you work together, how you're able to be a cohesive team unit. So things change a lot from trials. Like I would say that specifically for me, I perform relatively bad at trials. Maybe it's just that there's no competitive element for me as much, even though technically it is competitive, it's just not as direct. And I tend to improve a lot more from trials to the tournament. I think a lot of people have the same like level of training that they do for themselves when they're training for a tournament after trials. Um, so things change completely afterwards. So you shouldn't put too much stock on the actual number that you have. For example, I'm going to give you the tournament as I think my worst trials, I after having had relative success at joint breaking twice, I completely messed up the trials, like completely on me. I realized that I completely like bombed it and was put in a relatively low team. And it was fun. I liked my teammates. We had fun at the tournament. We didn't break. But my goal there was to kind of improve on myself and improve to that tournament. And at the tournament, I managed to out tap the team in front of me. The trial then, right? So there is a lot of scope to improve, especially if you think you haven't done the best you could have done at trials. That means you can do better at the tournament, and those things matter. The stack up. It's a helicopter.
It's really funny because I can only hear the helicopter when you start talking. So like it'll be silent and then the mic will pick up your voice and keep going. But yeah, I also agree. I think that people get quite caught up in like making a team number rather than making a team. Like I feel like the best teams that I've had haven't been like the best team I've made is A2. They haven't been on A2. Not that A2 was bad, but it's been when I've had really good teammates that I can work well with. Like at Joint 2020, when we had like really jumbled because we went in and out of lockdowns, and then I ended up being on A5 with Nick and Izzy, and that was like a really, really fun
It's a
team.
fun
And we
team.
ended
Yeah,
up
yeah.
being A3 equivalent because we were the third ranked Auckland team. We did really well at the tournament and got lots of, good feedback. And I ended up learning like a really, really large amount of things about university debating within that tournament. So even if, I don't get the accolades of breaking and all of those speaker awards, it still taught me a lot of things, which I definitely think have carried through with me too today. So it was very valuable then and continues to be valuable now. I think also another thing that Daniel always says to me that's really inspiring because he ends up being my mentor quite a lot at tournaments is he was like, it's not about your team number. It's just about how you perform at the tournament. I was A4
Very
at
true. Yeah,
offices many years ago, but I still broke because I simply won more debates. So you can break as A4 at this offices, Melissa. And I was like, wow, Daniel, that's so true and so inspiring. I should just win more. So yeah, and then I ended up, we missed break on speaks, but that was, as A4, so it was still an incredible achievement. I think that you being a certain number doesn't depend how successful you can be. I know that some A1s have absolutely tanked it, been awful, and not won, but then some A1s have been amazing, as well as A4s, A5s, whatever, doesn't matter on your team number. It's about the
oh
team that
yeah,
you're
yeah.
in
I mean,
and how
I
you
think
pitch.
it's pretty weird if you think that the team number is going to do all the work, right? Or in the converse, that the team number is somehow holding you back. It's on you and your team practicing together. Uh, People can change drastically in a couple of weeks and how good they are. And so, if you have a couple of weeks of trials, that's literally all the opportunity you need. So,
Yeah. I always thought that, like, oh, in marginal debates, they'll always just give it to A1 because they'll just assume that they're better. But if you look at, we'll do lots of practices and we'll do this thing called dynamic standings in the lead up to like majors like officers and joint. And usually A1 will, lose to A6 or A7 just because at that debate, A6 was better. So I don't think that judges actually have that kind of bias. And like same thing happened to me when I was at joint in 2021. I lost to O2. I thought, wow, everyone, if I get that A2 bias, I'm going to win debates. No, I actually still had to do the hard work. So it is just about the debate as it happens. Judges don't actually have the bias for at higher teams with those numbers or against lower teams with
oh yeah,
higher numbers.
for sure. At least when I judge, I try not to make that a factor.
Absolutely. And I would just like, in specific reference to Throppy, I would say that it's more about teammates, especially at Throppy. There's no real like a top ranked team. It's just about selectors picking teams that are equally likely to be successful. Obviously, the goal for Auckland when we are asking selectors to select is asking them to select as many competitive teams that are all going to have a chance of winning rather than just one. So
And it's
I
much
think
better to have a full Auckland teams breaking, and then you're guaranteed an Auckland win, and
absolutely.
it's very powerful, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Because then, if we get four Auckland teams breaking, then Auckland will have to win by default. We just don't know who. Yeah. So I think that would be my words of wisdom. It took me many years in my debating career to understand like the ins and outs of trials, what team numbers means, and everything like that. So that would be my view of trials in general. But just as a final question, we'll just do a little bit of a chat about what is Throppy like. Shah, you've been to more Throppies than me, but what happens there? How's it fun? Where do you go?
Yeah, no, Tropics is just a lot of fun. It was it wasn't actually the first tournament I trialed for. I trialed for Australs in 2016, didn't make a team. Actually, no, maybe I trialed for Tropi first, then Australs. Never mind. Tropi was lots of fun. I didn't know many people coming into university because I moved from Sri Lanka. But Tropi is where I made all my friends. I went to a dev day that was organized by the exec, met people, and I met the two people that ended up being my Tropi team for that year. We had a lot of fun. We had the finals. I didn't win, unfortunately. But those two, despite us going our separate ways in terms of we're not in uni anymore, we meet up every, I don't know, I guess once a month for drinks and stuff like that. So we're all still good friends. Which I think is what you actually get out of therapy. It's just making those kinds of good friends and just really smart people. Getting useful and smart people. So you get smart by being around them and chatting to them. And just get good chats. Get have memories. But also, not just people in your age group, I guess. Like older debaters that come to judge. Come to reminisce about their trophies and helicopter again. So if you can't hear me,
That's fine. I know that the point that you're getting at, so I'll continue it for you. Yeah, lots of old people come back to Throppy to judge because they want to relive their glory days because it's such a fun tournament. And yeah, some of the most inspiring times that I've had in debating is from old people like Daniel, even though he's not that old, but even older people like John PP coming back to tournaments and reminiscing about the good old days because it makes you realize that the friendships that you make in debating aren't just about debating. They do last a lifetime. And it was really fun for me with my teammates, Harper and Grace. We're still friends today, and Aisha was our little mentor, came and stayed with us at the motel. We're all still friends to this day. So it was a really, really good bonding experience and has really given me some really strong friendships that were hard to find elsewhere, considering that 2020 was a very lockdown-y year.
I'd also like to emphasize just our friends from across the way, Waikato and Victoria. Some of the, when I go to other cities now, my first instinct is always to hit up my friends from debating because we're pretty good friends, and that's always a good thing to have is that friendship from other campuses. A little bit of friendly rivalry never goes bad. It often makes those kinds of matchups and tournaments way more fun. So I encourage you to start building that, meeting friends from other campuses and creating that pipeline, I guess, of practicing together and improving together and using it as a circuit to the future.
Yeah, I agree. Like, even though they might be your arch rivals, like Meg, Florence, and Ellie have become like my best friends from Vic, even though, they were my staunch enemies at Throbby and the one team holding me back from getting hands on that trophy. But, the rivalry is only at a surface level. And it was just like an absolutely fun tournament with such a good time to recommend to everyone. And like the road trip vibes, it's really fun to travel with debating. I think that's the thing that you just can't really get many other clubs or places is that I've been all over the country with debating, made friends from Canterbury, Otago, Vic, Waikato. Been a very fun time to meet new friends and new faces. So definitely agree with Shah. Every time I'm in Christchurch, I'm like, oh, I know people here. I should, see them. I haven't seen them in a while. So yeah. Very fun time.
Very true. And once things open up, similar vibes for international. A lot of friends from Australia that I haven't seen for a while. It'll be fun to go in person tournament with them. So I encourage everyone who's watching this, aim for all the trials, Tropi trials, domestic tournaments like joint offices, but eventually aim for an international tournament because that's where I guess the culmination of everything we're talking about in terms of how much fun it is and how much you learn from it. It's probably the best in international tournaments. You meet way more people and just a variety of people from around the world, which is irreplaceable.
Yeah, I hope this has inspired you to come to Therapy Trials. If you haven't signed up already, the link will be in the description of this little video if I post it on the main page. But it's also got its own little event page that you can go and find, and the sign up link will be there. So I hope that you all do excellent in therapy trials. I'm sure you will, and I'm sure you'll be super excited to meet your teammates that will become your new besties going forward into the rest of the year. And I look forward to seeing you all at club nights in the future and at future tournaments. So looking forward to that. And Shah will still be around, I'm sure.
Yes, I will.
And thank you, Shah, for
No
joining me
worries.
today for a little chat about trials. I know that you are very, very knowledgeable on all things debating. So it's always good to draw on that knowledge and share it with our new faces in the society.
Of course, it's always a pleasure.